With the release of the Whimpering Wastes game mode, a lot of people have been wondering to themselves, how in the name of Imperator do I clear this game mode, and how does it even work? Well, that's what I'm here for. I'm going to explain to you how Whimpering Wastes works, and then give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to beat it efficiently. First, I'm going to talk about how Whimpering Wastes actually works. So, first you have to understand that Whimpering Wastes, unlike Tower of Adversity, does not work based on a vigor system. You can use the team that you like as many times as you feel like it. However, it does have the caveat that, much like Genshin Spiral Abyss, there is a first half and there is a second half, meaning that no matter what you do, you will always need two teams. It is also a requirement that every single team slot is filled, which means that you cannot do a true solo run like you can do in the tower. So, it doesn't matter which way you cut it, every single slot needs to be taken up by a character. Which also means that if you do not have 6 characters on your account, it is physically impossible for you to play this game mode. So if you're a 0 pulls account, that means that it's not really possible for you to play this game mode, unless you've gotten enough free characters by now, which I'm pretty sure you can actually. Now, next up, instead of working with a crest system like the Tower of Adversity, instead you need to get a certain amount of points. Think of this game mode kind of like Pure Fiction from Honkai Star Rail. Instead of trying to clear as fast as possible, you're trying to clear as many enemies in as little time as possible, and the amount of enemies you clear gives you a certain amount of points. But instead of needing a certain amount of points to get the maximum amount of stars, all of the points from this specific phase of the Whimpering Wastes will be counted up, and that tally will decide how many of the rewards you are allowed to claim. So for example, if you are looking here at stage 9, 10, and 11, all of these count as the exact same part of the Whimpering Wastes. So if you perform badly on stage 9, but you make up for it in stage 11, you'll still be able to grab all of the rewards from this zone. So you do not need to get a high rank on every single stage. You just need to get a high rank on enough so you can claim all the rewards. However, this ends up being not relevant in the final stage being stage 12, because stage 12 is the only one in its zone, so if you don't get enough points on stage 12, you will not be able to grab all of the rewards. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was the token system. The token system is essentially a buff that you can select to give to your team. And both of your sides will be able to grab a token, and each side will be able to have a separate token. So you can give one token to one team and another token to another team. It will, however, take one usage away from this token, assuming that it has a certain amount of usages. These usages are shared between zones, just like the point rewards. So you do need to plan out which token you're going to use in which stage with which characters, and make sure that you don't use it all immediately, except for, of course, the final stage because it's the only one in the zone, so you're free to use the best tokens available to the account. So now that I've explained how the Whimpering Wastes works, it's time to head into the combat portion. What does the combat within Whimpering Wastes look like? Well, it's going to be a lot of multi-wave and a lot of small enemies, so AoE and grouping is king. To get more into detail, you'll have a lot of small enemies spawning one after another. So when you kill one of the small enemies, another small enemy will spawn. Once this small enemy wave is finished, you're going to find about 3 elite enemies looking at you. All of them have pretty low HPs, so they will die pretty quickly if you use anything that has any sort of substantial force behind it. So any characters that focus on one big hit, like Jinhsi, do have a bit of a disadvantage here. What you're looking for is high, consistent AoE damage. No big nukes, no single target locking here. So when it comes to characters to avoid, mainly try and avoid the characters who have low AoE and those who are very bad at doing consistent damage. For example, one character I would avoid using is Encore. Now, Encore is a very good character within the Tower of Adversity. She gets some very good runs and is actually underrated by a lot of the community. However, Encore doesn't really have the greatest AoE, making her pretty mediocre for this game mode. Another character that I don't think is that strong here is going to be Carlotta. Now sure, she is very much able to brute force through almost all of this content. However, considering that most of her damage is in a straight line, she requires more positioning than she would within the Tower of Adversity, and thus becomes less effective here, but she'll still be able to clear the content with relative ease. So don't worry about your Carlotta being useless here, but if you have any better options, I would really recommend use those instead. To address the other big elephant within the room when it comes to strong Tower of Adversity characters, we have Jinhsi. Now Jinhsi has been a meta staple ever since her release back in 1.1, so there's no doubt that Jinhsi is still a very good character. But how does she handle the Whimpering Wastes? Well, she's quite decent here, but she's by no means insane. Jinhsi is one of those characters that deals a lot of her damage in one big hit, meaning that for the multi-wave of this game mode, she's not exactly the most efficient character to use. However, because the elites have around enough HP for Jinhsi to one-shot them, it means that you're not getting a lot of overkill, but on the smaller enemy waves, you are definitely still getting some overkill. But when it comes to characters that I think are top tier for this game mode, first of all, I would like to talk about Jiyan. Jiyan is a character whose biggest strong suit for a very long time was the fact that he was just such a good character for small mobs, because he was able to group them and keep them grouped. Jiyan had a very unique advantage, but because Tower was more boss focused, and with the small enemies being removed during 2.0, Jiyan kinda lost some of his value. But because of Whimpering Wastes, Jiyan got all of that lost value back quite easily. For the small enemy waves, he will by far be your best option, because he just sucks them up in his vacuum. His skill might not have a lot of AoE, but it's still worth using for the energy. Speaking of energy, that's another one of Jiyan's biggest flaws. However, in Whimpering Wastes, it might as well be non-existent. The amount of enemies you kill means that he will also be getting extra energy from that. So Jiyan is overall an incredibly good character for the Whimpering Wastes. Another great DPS will be Camellya. Now especially if you pulled Ferocia. Camellya is another very high AoE character, capable of having even a larger AoE than Jiyan. However, what she does not have is the grouping. Camellya, however, does have a higher overall damage output than Jiyan. And because all of the enemies spawn very close to where Camellya will end up after doing her skill, her inability to move ends up not mattering at all for this game mode. So that means Camellya is already a strong character. But combine this with Rochia, who is also an incredibly good character for the Whimpering Wastes, due to her very consistent grouping, you will have yourself a monster that will tear through all the AoE nonsense that you have to deal with. Now, if you're struggling with the Whimpering Wastes right now and want to see an improvement, Phoebe is a good character for this game mode. I don't think she's quite on the same level that Camellya and Jiyan are, but she is like a little bit below that. I would still say she is the third best character for the Whimpering Wastes at the moment. And there is a couple of reasons for this. First of all, Phoebe's AoE is very strong and very large. She has high AoE on her basics, high AoE on her heavies, and high AoE on her skill, and high AoE on her outro skill. Overall, everything that Phoebe has that does good damage has AoE. She's also able to stop enemies from moving in the first place, meaning that even if they spawn, it means that they will not be able to run away, because they're just frozen within her field for the first 2 seconds. So that means that enemies will be grouped when they spawn in, and they will stay grouped as well. And if they don't stay grouped, Phoebe's basics, when you're outside of her ring, have grouping. So even if they ungroup themselves, Phoebe will be able to put them right back in their place. Now the reason I think that Camellya and Jiyan are better in this game mode is because Phoebe does want enemies to be applied with Spectrofrazzle. So you will have to constantly swap out of Phoebe to apply Frazzle with Rover, and you'll have to swap back into Phoebe, which can be quite cumbersome. But if you master the timing for all of this, your Phoebe will be a very strong character within the Whimpering Wastes. One more overall big tip that I'm going to give to people is the fact that dual carry is incredibly strong for this game mode. and it's more so than just for the original reasons of you are able to use 2 DPSs at one time. It's mainly because you don't really care as much for getting the highest amount of damage per second. You just want to be pushing out damage at every single point in time, because the enemies aren't that strong. You don't need to hyper buff your DPS most of the time. You just want to be able to buff your characters just enough to where they can kill the enemy with ease. And then the other slot you can use for another DPS. So no matter what's happening, you can always have damage be pushing out, which means that waves are getting cleared. So that's another very strong way to beat the Whimpering Wastes with ease. So what do you think of our new Endgame game mode? Do you enjoy it? And if not, why not? Be sure to comment down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe to the video. If you still have any questions, it's best to join my Discord in the description, because I'm very active in there, and I'll read almost all the messages sent there. As for if you want to hear my random thoughts and ramblings on stuff, be sure to follow me on X or Twitter, which is also linked in the description. But that'll be it from me. Peace.